How close to living can we make a robot? Even if we disagree about what constitutes life, we can agree on one thing about life forms. Being alive means you can, you should, you must harvest energy. And when you can't, you cease to function. You die. You are terminated. Now, robots need to harvest and use energy too. The energy supply for robots is often a battery. It's not really fair to say that robot harvests energy if we humans put batteries in, right? They're not harvesting it, we're giving it to them. But remember Roomba? Roomba went back to its charger. Other robots can do even more. Since 2009, the PR2 testbed robot from Willow Garage has been able to open doors for itself, move on if a door is locked, find a standard wall outlet, plug itself in, and get energy. Other robots cut the cord entirely. The Wave Glider robot uses wave power to swim and solar power to charge its batteries. But none of these methods of energy harvesting are similar to what animals do. We animals eat food. Our stomach, intestines, and digestive organs work to chemically break down the organic matter that we ingest. And then we extract at a molecular level chemical potential energy for later use by our cells. One of the first attempts to digest food in a robot, an automaton, comes from 18th century France and an inventor named Jacques de Vaucanson. In 1739, Vaucanson charged admission fees for people to see his mechanical duck. It would eat and then, forgive me, defecate. This was a very popular exhibit, if you can believe it. And if you were watching the duck, you would see the food going into the mouth, and you might guess that the gears were macerating grain internally, and you're not sure about the chemical digestion part, and then voila! We have tubes coming out the rear end for waste delivery. Merde! But really, this famous pooping duck was an elaborate hoax. Grain fed into the duck's mouth went below the main platform and was exchanged there for a moist poop, which was really pre-made out of breadcrumbs. But the idea of genuinely organic energy autonomy is no joke. There's a robot capable of ingesting organic matter for food and for fuel. It's a wheeled ground robot called EATER, which stands for Energetically Autonomous Tactical Robot. Under development by Robot Technology Incorporated in partnership with DARPA, the basic idea of EATER is simple in concept. Search the environment for organic material, collect it, and then convert it into a usable energy source. The guts of the operation, quite literally, is an external combustion engine. Water in one chamber is heated by combustion of organic matter, biomass, in an adjacent but separate chamber. Once ingested, the biomass is burned to provide heat. The heat from the food boils the water. That heat is used in a heat exchanger to generate electrical power. EATER is a great idea if you need your robot to operate in remote areas for long periods of time. Imagine being able to collect and burn your own fuel. But good idea or not, EATER isn't digesting its food chemically. Yet even real chemical digestion and energy creation are in fact possible. At the University of West of England, Professor Chris Melhuish and his colleagues have been working on a biologically based fuel cell that uses bacteria, microbes, to convert things like rotting fruit into electrical energy. Fuel cells convert chemical energy into electrical energy, and they are all the rage as energy alternatives to internal combustion engines in our vehicles. The standard fuel cell uses hydrogen or hydrocarbons as its chemical source, and a chemical reaction of the hydrogen with another chemical, like oxygen, moves electrons around. The trick of a fuel cell is to arrange electron donors and electron acceptors in such a way as to organize and guide the movement of the electrons so that a useful electrical current can be generated. Now, what Melhuish and his colleagues have done is to put living microorganisms into the fuel cell. These microbes take in chemicals from rotten fruit, like apples, and produce, as their waste products, free electrons. Those free electrons are collected and guided. Their movement is used to create an electrical current. Melhuish has put the microbial fuel cells into a robot called EcoBot 2. 8 of the fuel cells are arranged on the deck of a round-wheeled robot, and the fuel cells work away, and the electrical current they produce charges capacitors. Capacitors are electronic devices built to store up and then quickly release electrical charge. The stored charge in EcoBot 2's capacitors is used to power either its wheels or its communication system. EcoBot 2 has a controller that works with photodetectors to head the robot towards a light source, powered by rotten apples. EcoBot 2 is a very slow-going robot, but if you are patient, you can see in this video clip it lurching forward now and then. Why is it so slow? Well, keep in mind that electrical power comes from biological cells in this robot. These are living organisms inside the fuel cells. EcoBot 2 is a type of gastrobot, a robot that gets all of its energy from the digestion of food. EcoBot 2 is on the road to true energy autonomy, and that's the goal of Mel Hewish's research project. Now imagine that we could combine EcoBot's chemical digestion talent with Eater's ability to search for and find appropriate food in the environment. Then we would really be moving robots towards total energy autonomy and operating like life forms. Seek out new life forms and eat them. Another thing that life forms do that robots don't is to build themselves. Well, that's a funny way to put it, but building yourself is what you did and may still be doing. Be proud of what you've accomplished. That's not the way we normally engineer robots or other devices. We don't start with an engine, turn it on, connect a single wheel, and then ask it to drive down the highway while we search for parts to attach to it to make it into an adult automobile. Nope. We assemble the whole darn thing. One really nifty exception is the International Space Station, which has had to function while we've been building it. Much of life starts as an egg, but we don't think of eggs as doing much except hanging out, waiting for life to happen. But really, eggs are alive, and the creation of multiple cells is one of the first tasks for an egg. Make more of me. So there's work to be done even there. Most organisms develop in stages. Mosquitoes develop through a life cycle, from egg to larva, from larva to pupa, then from pupa to imago. Larvae start moving around in the world and doing what? Can you guess? Of course, feeding, harvesting energy. The larvae grow into the larger pupa, whose job it is to build a new set of structures that will make the winged air creature we know and love, the mosquito, technically that imago stage of development. What's helpful about looking at the life cycle of an insect is that we can think about different stages in that life. Caterpillars are a classic example of becoming butterflies and having a life cycle that's divided up into discrete stages. We can glean from mosquitoes some basic life lessons for building yourself. Move around to gather energy. Use that energy to make yourself bigger by building more of you. And as you grow bigger, build new kinds of structures that allow you to move around in different ways, collect energy in different ways, and, lest we forget, figure out how to make offspring. Can you imagine building a robot that builds itself? How would you do that? Chicken and the egg. Where to begin? Sam Felton begins with a sheet of paper. Okay, well, maybe not just a piece of paper, but with a sheet of composite material that includes paper, copper, polyamide, and pre-stretched polystyrene. Polyamide is a plastic-like insulating film that's used in medical tubing. Polystyrene is a plastic that you encounter in packing peanuts and yogurt containers. So we have in Felton's laminate the following: paper, metal, and plastic. When you heat this composite sheet of material, the polystyrene shrinks, and if you arrange the paper and polystyrene in the right way, the heating will cause the layer to fold. Add heat, the sheet folds, and the sheet builds itself. This is like a simple kind of origami, but instead of a human doing the folding, the paper is folding itself. Wicked, wicked cool, right? And now what Felton and his team in Robert Wood's lab at Harvard have done is to program the sheet to fold up in a particular pattern, to make legs, engage a motor, and walk away. What's really impressive is to watch this action unfold, so to speak. You can see in this clip that as the system is heated, from 2 dimensions, we get 3. Most impressive is when the thing, which a few minutes before was a strange-looking sheet, has just folded itself up and then walked away. What in the heck happened? This machine just built itself, that's what. Now what's really exciting about this process is that the instructions for building itself were not written in computer code or DNA. Instead, the instructions were built into the laminate sheet. This is what they mean when Felton and his team talk about programming matter. Keep in mind that the catalyst that starts the self-assembly is a change in the environment, heat in this case. Now to think about Felton's self-assembled walker in terms of a life cycle, we can think of that flat sheet as the egg stage, roughly, sitting around, ready to make something out of itself. The heat turns on, the egg begins to build itself, a larval stage involving growing up literally and building the adult. The adult stage is the final walker, which leaves home as soon as it can. A different approach to life cycles in robots has been taken by Josh Bongard, a professor at University of Vermont. He and his team have focused on metamorphosis, the transition from one life cycle stage to another. Working in digital simulation and with embodied robots, they discovered that individuals programmed to change their bodies over time found new, better behaviors more rapidly than robots that held their bodies constant. The robot starts by laying flat on the ground with a sprawled posture, legs out. It has a controller program whose job is to figure out how to move those legs in order to move the whole body. Using an evolutionary program, which I'll tell you more about later, many different and randomly created controller programs can be tried out. The best one is the one that moves the robot the fastest across the ground. Once a good controller is evolved that works well for the sprawled posture, that controller can be used as the starting point for when the robot brings its legs underneath its body. Now, if the body changes in one fell swoop, then it turns out that it takes longer to evolve a controller that works well, compared to allowing the change in the body's posture to be part of the robot's gradual development. During development, the legs slowly change their posture, and that helps bridge the original controller to the final controller. The result is that development speeds up evolution. Now this metamorphosis is not a transformer kind of metamorphosis. Optimus Prime, this robot, is not. But it shows the benefit of having a body that can change and the benefit of having a process that can search for new controllers that can make the best use of the ever-changing body. Think of that as a search process. It's a search process within the life of an individual that can be thought of as a compound process of learning and development. And this takes place by trial and error. A related search process is evolution. Now, one of the differences between development and evolution is that while development describes the changes taking place to an individual, evolution describes the changes that are taking place from one generation to the next, from one group of individuals to another group of related individuals, from parents to offspring. Like development and learning, evolution works by trial and error, but on a different scale. Since evolution is definitely a feature of life forms, let me take a minute to explain in broad strokes how it works. Then I'll show you how we apply it to robots. The basic idea is that you have a population, like a group of fish, let's say, that you see in the tank here in the laboratory. Each individual is slightly or dramatically different from others. Now let's say a predator, another species of fish, is in the same lake, same tank as these fish, and this predator really likes orange fish. After a while, all that's left are the non-orange fish, let's say the yellowish ones. We would say that the predator has selected certain individuals to die and certain individuals to live. The survivors, in turn, are very important, since they're the only individuals around to become the parents of the next generation. They reproduce, creating a new population. If we compare the first generation to the second, the parents to the offspring, you could see right away that the average color of the fish has changed. Color has evolved. Now, how does this relate to trial and error? Think of each individual in generation 1 as a separate experiment in fish color. No one is sure which colors will be the best in any given year. So the trick is to make sure that each year there are different colors out there. Imagine if all the fish were orange, they'd all be eaten. So variation is key here. Give us options, and each variation is on trial. In this particular example, the errors, in a trial and error sense, are the orange fish, since the predator eats all of them. So the system changes by trial and error, finding, over many generations, the best color to be if you want to avoid being eaten. Now, the very cool thing about evolution is that it's another one of these processes that is characteristic of life, and using the process of evolution, we can evolve robots. For roboticists, evolution is one way to design robots. But the design is not like the engineering approaches that we've explored. Design by evolution is also not like the hacking approach that we've used. Standard engineering and hacking both involve humans making decisions about the design of robots. Not so with evolution. We take the humans out of the design loop. This should sound familiar. It's like taking humans out of the control loop, allowing robots to perform tasks autonomously. With evolution, we are allowing robots to design themselves autonomously. Let's take a moment to appreciate all this. We can boil life down to autonomy. Like dogfish, sharks, all life forms do all of this on their own. They eat, they behave, they develop, and they evolve. And as we work from nature, like sharks, to create robots that have more properties of life, we are extending the kinds of autonomy that they have. Eating becomes energy harvesting. Behaving becomes performing tasks. Development becomes self-assembly. And evolution becomes automatic redesigning. I want to talk more about this evolution, this auto-redesigning process. And let me introduce you to another kind of robot called the Tadro robot. Now, I've got some robots in here that are built on the Tadro design, which is this, what is essentially a food container, servo motor with a microcontroller inside. There are some eye spots here, and look at this thing off the back. This is a tail that has vertebrae in it. So when we ran our evolutionary experiments, we called the robots that were the prey robots, the ones that were going to be eaten by the predator, prey row. And prey row is a model of a 400-million-year-old fish called Drepanaspis. Working with my colleagues at Vassar College, what we're trying to understand is what kinds of selection pressures may have caused ancient fish like Drepanaspis to evolve the bones in their back that we humans have. We call these bones vertebrae. So the answer lets us understand how vertebrates got their vertebrae and got their start. This is an example of a flexible rod to which we've added some vertebrae-like bones. Give you a sense of what a backbone looks like. Now, our guess was that predators might be selecting for faster fish over slower ones. Based on biomechanical tests that we've done with fish and swimming robots, we actually predicted that faster fish would be the ones with more vertebrae in their back. To test the evolutionary idea about the importance of vertebrae, we put different individuals of prey row, each with a backbone with different numbers of bones, into a tank with a robot predator. That predator was called Tadiator. So let me show you some examples of some biomimetic skeletons with different numbers of vertebrae. So here are two different kinds of prey row. This one here is just loaded up with vertebrae in the tail. This one has just a few. And I have a third Tadro over here. And this robot has none. So these skeletons, these vertebral columns, are used by these robots as the primary axial skeleton in the tail, the propulsive element of these robots. Now, what I would like to do for you here, everything is the same in these three robots except the number of vertebrae in their tails. I'd like to get them swimming and give you an example of what has happened when we evolve robots in terms of evolving different kinds of functions. So I can show you what happens to swimming performance and let you see here. So I'm going to start turning these guys on, and I have to signal to them to get their tail moving by putting them in darkness. So I have a little dark chamber here. Little dark chamber, there they go. You can see their tails wiggling. Come on. All right, this one's not wanting to behave here, so we'll just set it aside. Well, this is perfect. The two that are working we have with the fewest and the most vertebrae. And let's just turn them around here and do a little race so we'll see how they swim differently, if at all. Maybe there's no functional difference. All right, prey row, go. Here we go. What are you seeing here? Now they're not swimming perfectly straight here in the water. And this one kind of is off kilter. And what's really funny about this, but it's telling, right, is what's supposed to happen is the one with more vertebrae is supposed to swim faster. And I think it was clear that this one actually swam more slowly. Now this is telling for a reason. I set this up for you to try to show that evolution would select for higher numbers of vertebrae. But what actually happened when we ran our experimental tests is it was the intermediate number of vertebrae along these lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, actually about 6 was the best number. So the robot where that tail didn't work was actually the best swimmer in our evolutionary trials. So this just shows that there's actually a problem when you make your tail too stiff. There's a trade-off. So it's actually, I didn't mean it to happen this way, but it's a perfect example of the kinds of trade-offs that we see happen in evolutionary system. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about the evolutionary trials that we ran. We had behaviorally autonomous robots, I'm not sure I said that, and of two different types, right? We had the prey rows and we had the tadiators. So prey rows in any one generation, any particular prey row was one of 6 different individuals or 6 different genotypes in that population. And it was actually competing against those other prey rows to see who was selected by the predator to be parents for the next generation. And the top 3 performers were the ones who were allowed to breed to make that next generation. Each prey row was cloned so that we had 3 identical triplets to test against the predator. So with 6 different genotypes, that made for 18 different prey row tails that we tested every generation. All any individual prey row wants to do is to eat, and we used light as a substitute for eating. So in robotics terminology, prey row's behavioral goal is to swim up a gradient of light intensity. The light is really a metaphor for food here. One prey row is tested at a time in the tank, and while it is trying to eat, Tadiator, which I don't have here for you, is on the loose. And Tadiator is single-minded. All Tadiator wants to do is eat the prey row. So it heads towards prey row, and prey row is its food, right? And so in the video clip that I'm showing you, you can see that initially Tadiator misses prey row on the first pass and has to circle around. It chases up from behind and comes and gets prey row, knocks it from its blind spot. Prey row senses the Tadiator too late and gets nailed. I should tell you that prey row can detect the Tadiator using IR proximity detectors, and the Tadiator can sense the prey row based on that IR signal. So we ran each individual multiple times and came up with a score of how well the genotypes were doing. This is kind of like evolutionary Olympics. So in fact, what we were doing here, as I mentioned, is taking the top 3 prey rows in each generation and sort of awarding a bronze, silver, and gold medal winners. And those individuals could then pass their genes on to the next generation. And we were coding in their genes how many vertebrae that they had. Now, one really important thing to emphasize here. When we evolve robots, we don't know how events will turn out. We have a guess, like more vertebrae will make for better feeding and fleeing, but we aren't sure. That's where that intermediate that came out here is so important. We didn't know it was going to be an intermediate number of vertebrae. We have to let evolution run the course. What determines the outcome are random factors, like genetic mutations that make sure that individuals are different, and selection, in this case, from the predator. So when we talk about evolution being an automatic design process, this is what we mean. Humans don't predetermine the outcome. But humans do play a role. For our population of prey row, they depend on us humans to conduct a mating algorithm on the computer. In addition to that mating algorithm, we also use a genetic algorithm to add in small amounts of mutation to the reproductive cycle. When we produce the genomes for the next generation, those are actually plans for us to construct by hand the offspring of those parents. This brings up reproduction. Can robots reproduce on their own? Well, the idea of self-replicating machines has been a serious scholarly topic at least since mathematician John von Neumann introduced the thought experiment of a self-reproducing automaton in 1948. Much more recently, NASA has funded research proposals into how robots might replicate themselves, since this could be a very efficient way to begin mining or other large-scale operations on other planets. A partial proof of concept came from Hod Lipson at Cornell University. His team created a modular robot built of cubes that could replicate itself if given other cubes. Each module, called a molecube, is its own autonomous robot, and they link with other molecubes via reversible magnetic interfaces. Each molecube has the plans for replication, and most importantly, each cube has an actuator that allows it to rotate its faces about a single revolute axis. This allows the cube to grab another cube and then rotate itself to lift that new cube to a position above it. In essence, a cube can stack itself. Isn't that a crazy idea? So with a column of multiple molecubes, the modular robot can bend over then and construct itself. Replicate. Molecubes are available now commercially from Festo Corporation as an educational robotics system. A completely different approach has been taken by Professor Mark Kim, who runs the Modular Robotics Lab at the University of Pennsylvania. He and his colleagues have created and built FoamBot, which is able to build other robots of various designs. The key here is that FoamBot lives up to its name and actually sprays foam onto actuators. That foam hardens, and then the new FoamBot, which can be of any shape you might spray, can pick itself up and walk away. So the key to the FoamBot idea is that there is one robot whose job it is to reproduce, to make other robots. Both Molecubes and FoamBot show us that the idea of reproducing robots is feasible. For robot reproduction to work, what we still need is the robot or the group of specialized robots to be able to harvest energy and raw materials, use what they harvest to create finished materials and components, and finally, to assemble themselves. Throughout this course, we've been paying close attention to the bodies and behaviors of biologically inspired robots. What we've seen in this lecture goes beyond body shapes, movement patterns, or sensory processing. It turns out that even core features of life are beginning to become possible for robots. Robots can eat, obtaining and harvesting energy on their own. This is metabolism. Robots can build themselves. This is growth. Robots can evolve. And finally, robots can replicate themselves and build other robots. Sure as heck sounds like life to me, doesn't it?